She's doing great. And then the younger one got her doctorate. So she's working. She's in downtown St. Pete, like in downtown. And, so she's, she's in her 20s and lives in downtown St. Pete. Where else would you want to live? So they're doing great. We're very happy. Yeah, yours are still so little, right? Yeah. What's full? Oh.
Mrs. Brown to the podium. Mrs. Brown to the podium. That means nothing. Right.
Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Try again. Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order, a special meeting of the board dated June 28th, 2018. If we can all please rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we get started, I know I mentioned this to the superintendent. I wanted to first thank all of the members of our law enforcement and municipalities for attending today. To be respectful of, since there are a number of business items for the board to go through today, I wanted to revise the order of the agenda or business to start with a discussion with the sheriff and the board, and then move into the business of the board. So if I can invite our Sheriff Tom Knight to the workshop square, not the podium.
Yeah, I want to apologize. I know Chief Pepino and Chief Morales are here. I don't know if you'd like them to hang out, or if you have any questions from all of us, it's a great time for all of us to answer questions. I do that a lot, sure.
So we can pull up a couple chairs. Then yeah, absolutely. So if it,
If you have any questions,
okay,
This conversation would be
with the sheriff.
specific to the sheriff, but then when we do the overview, I would
Okay.
suggest that we invite them forward.
Okay. Welcome, and again, thank you for being here.
on, Shirley. The light means I'm on. You are the educator.
Do a tutorial. So press the button if you wish to speak. Otherwise, if the red light's not on, then you won't be heard. So welcome. Thank you again for being here.
And I want to say before we start is thank you for the opportunity. I think it's healthy for me to be questioned and for us to talk openly. I think the community wants us to talk, and I think the five of you and me, that we want our kids safe. And my goal today is to finalize some things, and that'll be a discussion we have as the 6 people who are elected by this community to represent them. And I look forward to finalizing today and to flesh out some things. With me here is Colonel Kurt Hoffman. He's my chief legal counsel and my number 2. He is an attorney. Major Paul Richard is my law enforcement division commander. He is the operational guy. So if you would just indulge us, and Marissa's with me. If you would indulge us, we'll do a little presentation. My hopes is that you can ask us any questions about the contract. I know, Shirley, you had a couple questions about the contract, certainly, and I think the Colonel will explain some of those things, and we're certainly willing to look at the contract and make any modifications that you want, that you're comfortable with your schools, that we believe can be done properly within the confines of the law. And then Major Richard will talk a little bit about operations, of what we believe is right for the operations to keep the kids safe, and then we'll have that dialogue, and you can decide what you want to do. But to get started a little bit, we have a quick little PowerPoint. And again, I want to thank the superintendent for the communication we've had, and I think he, as well as I, are probably ready to move forward and do some things that are more positive for our community. So, Todd, thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
I think one thing for certain that we have up here, and for us in the public eye, and us who are elected, and the superintendent, I think it's fair to say success is directly related to the number of uncomfortable conversations we're willing to have. And I think that we've all had uncomfortable conversations for the last few months, me as well as you. This is an author who writes personal development books, that sometimes we all need to work on our personal development as long as we are here. But I hope that you take that this is not going to be an uncomfortable conversation today. I think that's behind us, and I hope that we can have some good dialogue, and if we disagree on things, we'll get it fixed here today. So thank you for that opportunity, and with the letter that I got from the superintendent last week and my response in writing, so we can hash it out today. If you would, to move it along pretty rapidly. This is where Major Hoffman's going to come in. I know, Shirley, you had some questions about it, and we're more than happy to answer it. There's 2 bullet points here the Colonel will talk about and hopefully give you some clarity. Is Art Hardy here today, or is your legal representation here? So you have legal representation. So if there's anything legally that you want to, but Kurt, if you would, go ahead and talk a little bit about why this contract was set the way it is and the type of people that are going to be from the Sheriff's Office inside that contract. So go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Superintendent, board members, for this opportunity to kind of flesh out some of the issues with the Act itself and with the contract. So I'll just start with a few points about the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. As I'm sure all of you can attest, and I know I've had conversations with the superintendent, it's a very lengthy bill, 105 pages, very intricate piece of legislation. So we've spent a significant amount of time internally at the Sheriff's Office and with our other law enforcement partners going through this with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that the provisions both from the training side and from the contractual side are where they need to be. I can tell you that the Florida Sheriff's Association and the Florida Association of Police Attorneys have been intricately involved in the implementation of this act. So it's not, what we recommend is not being done in a vacuum. We certainly have had conversations with our peers, at least I have on a very regular basis. So our contract that we submitted that came back with your revisions excluded some of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act language references in it. And I had specifically put that in there because I wanted to put the school board, the superintendent, the media, all of the citizens that are here concerned about their kids, put them on notice that first and foremost, and we had it up front in the contract, that we will be fully compliant with the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act. That goes beyond just being a certified law enforcement officer. That seems to be what we've all kind of been talking about. But there are additional training criteria built into that. So I put the references to the Act into the contract. The version we got back, they were out. I prefer and I recommended to the sheriff that they be in there. So we're all on the same page with what it is that we're delivering. Specifically, for those of you that haven't read the 105 pages, crisis intervention with a mental health training component, active shooter training, de-escalation training when dealing with youth, and participation in the threat assessment tool, if you recall, are the important factors above and beyond the law enforcement certification. That's kind of a minimum, and then obviously the Act added all this additional language. So I wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page with that. As it relates to the contract language specifically, obviously we're now discussing SRD1s and SRD2s as we've become familiar with those terminology. And for instance, there's the contract that came back to us after we had sent ours had a provision in it that the school resource deputy could leave the campus during the tour, their particular tour of duty. I think that may have been a mistake. It's old language. Obviously, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act says there has to be a law enforcement personnel on the campus during all times that school is in session. And we've kind of deferred and had conversations with Dr. Bowden about what is in session. But that language that came back to me, that's got to come out because that's not in compliance with the Act. So we have some issues there that we need to true up. Additionally, my recommendation to the sheriff, because of this is obviously a very high liability area anyway when you're dealing with children and you're dealing with public records and that kind of thing, but the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act in terms of the responsibilities adds a whole nother layer to this. So my recommendation to the sheriff was that we have language in that contract that definitively states that we control the personnel. And I know that's been, to some degree, a bone of contention, but as the sheriff's general counsel, I often tell him we incur the liability. We're the ones doing the training. We're the ones that have the partnerships with the other agencies, federal, state, local, whatever it may be. So there is some language in there specifically about the control that we have over our personnel and how we're going to share certain pieces of information. And I'll just give you an example. Major Richard and I are both members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We have secret clearance through the FBI. A lot of the interaction, without going into great detail, with JTTF during post-Parkland, we had a lot of interaction with them, and we were able to chase down all of those instances real time because of that relationship. And then obviously National Crime Information Center, Florida Crime Information Center, CJNet, all those resources that we use to be able to protect kids were not allowed, and there's pretty severe penalties for sharing a lot of that information. So again, I thought it best, because we have those MOUs in place and access, and we both are on the Terrorism Task Force, that the sheriff retain control of that data and the way that data is used. Lastly, probably with the contract, and I'll let Major Richard speak to this a little bit, the number of school resource deputies was reduced, both from a supervision standpoint and from a line level manpower standpoint, reducing the one at Riverview High School. We've talked extensively internally. We're intimately familiar with all the instances that happened at Riverview. Major Richard and I were living them real time at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when we were chasing those leads down. So, and I believe, I won't speak for the sheriff, but I believe he agrees, taking a deputy off the Riverview campus in terms of the activity that's generated there would be a mistake. And then you look to Lieutenant Kiner, who was removed from the contract when it came back to us. That span of control and that redundancy built into the contract, and I want to steal Major Richard's thunder, but that's consistent with other parts of the agency and how we do business. And it's actually more important now than it ever was before, because as I stated, if a deputy calls in sick, if they have court, if they make an arrest, I'm relying on those supervisors to go in and backfill and be able to be on campus so that we are in compliance with the act. This is a very heavily structured act, as I said, and I don't want this district, this sheriff's office, to be the community that's going to be on the news, because I'm going to tell you, there's going to be a failure somewhere in the state of Florida, and we've taken drastic measures to make sure that's not going to be happening here in Sarasota County. So I think with that, as far as the operational side of it specifically, I'll turn that over to Major Richard.
Just in 1 minute, Paul, if and so, because I know you're going to have some questions, we'll answer any questions you have. We'll make any modifications you want to make or talk about at least. And I think Paul, the major, is going to talk a little bit. He's been with the Sheriff's Office longer than I have. And so he's going to talk a little bit about the evolution of the school resource officer. I know, Caroline, you had some concerns about them teaching the kids and stuff. And absolutely, we still want to do it. Paul's going to have a little short video to show the deputies that are on these campuses and what they're trained to do and stuff. But there's no intention here under this contract to remove them from their opportunity to work with the principal, what the principal wants on those campuses, and to continue to do what they're doing. But the contract is set to protect the sheriff's office and this school district. Like Kurt said, somewhere around the state, some school district or some sheriff's office or police department is not going to be set properly within compliance with that law, and they're going to be heavily exposed. And so this is a new world. But the major's going to show a quick thing, and I think you can ask him any questions operationally. If the superintendent or any of the 5 of you want to ask about the evolution of the school resource program, what it was when I took over 10 years ago, what this agency's always done with this district, and where we're going to now under this act, and what the public expects us to do primarily is to keep their kids safe. And so, but Paul, go ahead and talk, and then we'll answer any questions you guys have, and hopefully get some resolution. I know that the chiefs are here. They want to talk a little bit about the elementary schools.
Thank you, Sheriff. I believe mine's on. Major Paul Richard. I'm the Law Enforcement Division Commander for Sheriff Knight. The Law Enforcement Division is the largest of the 3 divisions the Sheriff has, just over 400 individuals. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you today. I want to do a little bit of background for the board and certainly the community about our program. We're your longest partner. We're your largest partner, but by no means am I speaking just for the school resource deputies. We're going to use that terminology because that's what they are with our office, is deputies. But our municipal partners that are here in attendance are exactly that. They're partners. They're great partners. We work together every day. We communicate together every day. We have meetings together annually, biannually on what's going on in our school district, what's going on in school resource programs. So I want to acknowledge, their presence here and the wonderful services they provide encourage you as well. Let me start, please, and talk to you about our program. Our partnership with the school district began back in 1980. I've been here 30 years, and that's about 38 years, actually. It's evolved many times over the years. The program was originally founded on the school resource triad philosophy. I've heard you all talk about that. This philosophy involved being a teacher, a counselor, and a law enforcement officer. As you may recall, some of the courses that we provided were officer-friendly. What is a police officer's role? Stranger danger. Gun safety, bicycle safety, drug abuse resistance education, known as DARE. We're still conducting that training. Gang resistant education and training, known as GREAT. But as the economy presented all of us challenges and budgets fluctuated, the school resource program has been scaled back to the middle and high schools, as you know. Today, our school resource deputy unit consists of 12 school resource deputies assigned to 11 schools, 2 sergeants, and 1 lieutenant. This is the minimum number of personnel necessary to be both effective and efficient. One of our #1 goals at the Sheriff's Office is to provide effective and efficient law enforcement services in partnership with our community, and we certainly regard the district as one of those great partners. Our school resource deputies have a combined years of law enforcement experience as 276 years of law enforcement experience, or an average of 20 years for each one of those deputies. The school resource deputies have a combined 92 years of working as a school resource deputy, or 7 years per deputy. I think that's very important. Along with that, I believe Captain Enos, who's a staff member at our agency, is here today. I think you all are very familiar with him. He's not only a staff member with the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, he also serves as the executive director of the Florida Association of School Resource Officers. Prior to Captain Enos' promotion, he served as a supervisor in our youth services section, our school resource program, for 15 years. Captain Enos is regarded as probably not the subject matter expert on school resource programs for the state of Florida. Just recently, Captain Enos was called to present on best practices for school resource programs to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission at their recent meeting in Broward County just a couple of weeks ago. In our prior 38 years of partnership, we've worked seamlessly together. Our school resource deputies work directly with their principals every day. The principals, their faculties, and the school resource deputies have forged long-standing relationships built upon trust. Our school resource deputies are an integral part of their school families. They know their students, and they're considered part of the school faculty. Immediately after the mass shooting at Parkland, our community was experiencing great anxiety, as I think all of us were. We felt it necessary to reassure everyone that our campuses are safe learning environments. In an effort to do so, as well as to reaffirm our commitment to our schools, our Community Affairs Office produced the following video. I hope you all have seen it. I believe it is certainly appropriate for this meeting. This video was released on February 28th, 2 weeks after the tragedy at Parkland High School. Please indulge me just for a minute. It's just over a minute long.
We are your school resource deputies.
Because we are here to mentor and be positive role models.
To teach kids how to be successful adults.
To empower students to make good choices and think about their future.
To foster relationships between students, faculty, and law enforcement.
We may wear uniforms, but it's important that this community knows.
We are parents too. Our children attend the same schools.
We help our kids with the same homework and send them on the same school bus.
We hug them every morning, hoping they'll be safe, just like you do.
The only difference is we are the ones honored enough to protect them.
We are all sworn law enforcement officers, but our true calling is to safeguard our community and the children within it.
When I put on this uniform in the morning, I'm not only protecting your child, I'm also protecting mine. Together, the school resource deputies at the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office
are working every day to keep your children safe.
I know there's been a lot of discussion amongst the board about the role of a school resource deputy. Well, I think you can see how proud we are today to talk about the personnel we have, and I thought it's appropriate that you get to hear from them as well. I want to talk a little bit now about Riverview High School, if I may. This past school year, our school resource deputies throughout the county at those schools worked a total of 405 calls for service. What is a call for service? It's something that requires an action by a deputy, which results in a written report, such as assaults, disturbances, thefts, and mental health related issues are what we see commonly on our campuses. Riverview High School, as you know, is our largest high school with over 2,500 students. It alone generated over 200 calls for service. The school resource deputies assigned to that campus completed 129 of those calls. Those 129 calls are 4 times the average of all the other campuses. As the district's largest and clearly busiest, I also want to personally say I think it would be outrageous to suggest that that campus can be adequately served by one school resource deputy. That would not provide for the adequate safety of the student, the faculty, or that deputy. Lastly, I would like to discuss our school resource supervision. The span of control within our school resource deputy unit, like the Colonel mentioned, is what we've decided is most appropriate. That's what provides for a professional workforce on a daily basis. The sergeants supervise the daily responsibilities of the deputies and are on our campuses every day. The Colonel also talked a little bit about the redundancy. There isn't any real redundancy. This is a very effective and certainly an efficient contract that we provided to you all. But of course, when a deputy is absent from their shift, in most instances it is that sergeant that covers the school that day. When a principal, any staff member, or a parent of a student has a concern that's not appropriate to be handled by a school resource deputy, it is a sergeant that provides that immediate support, guidance, and a resolution in real time for those folks. The lieutenant assigned to the unit is also the direct liaison to the school district for any concerns involving our campuses, legal issues, or the myriad of issues that arise on a regular basis. This position is a full-time, 365, 7-day-a-week, 24-hour liaison between our office and the school district, just as it has been for the last 38 years. Additionally, now, I know I spoke to Mrs. Brown right before about a DCF meeting later today. There's the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, and there's also Governor Scott's Executive Order 18-81 that includes some direction to the Department of Children and Families that also includes the school district and law enforcement. The lieutenant in here is your liaison for that, along with whatever representatives you choose, as well as our representative to that board. The Colonel mentioned it, but the Lieutenant's additional responsibilities now will be to work with you all. You know you have to have a security risk assessment for each of your public schools. That will be that Lieutenant's position. We need to help you establish those threat assessment teams on all of your campuses. And we also are now required to help you assist in the emergency drills and the active shooter training on a biannual basis. I hope you found my comments helpful towards your decision making. We look forward to continuing our 38-year collaboration in making Sarasota County and the school district a safe and secure community. Thank you very much.
Thank
Sheriff
you.
Knight. And I know Paul hit some of the things operationally that, we talk about the threat assessments, that's in the act. So that's the collaboration of local law enforcement sheriffs. So, we gotta participate with you on that. That's part of the act. But I think really that's the high school and middle schools. And we can answer any question you have. We're not going to be offended by any tough questions, but more importantly, we want to hash out what you're looking at on the contract. I know you had some questions about it. I hope those answered it. If not, we can certainly still pull it up and take a look at it. And your legal staff is here, your legal attorney's here to make sure that we're doing the right thing. That's all we're trying to really do. So it's the board's pleasure. We'll answer any questions.
Members of the board, do you have any questions? Mrs. Brown.
Yeah, I understand that there were some new things that needed to be added to the contract, but those are the things we needed to sit down and talk together about. And I guess when I say we, I really didn't mean we. I mean, the contract says you should sit down, if not you, your designee, sit down with our superintendent or his designee and work those things out. Could be your legal representative and our legal representative, but we need to work those out. But I was concerned that it seemed as though we were just putting a cop with a gun in the school. And we all know that that's not going to stop it. It's that work. And in fact, I was at the Florida School Boards Association. They came up with many things. The Sandy Hook Promise, free resources to our schools that we can do that I would want your deputies to be even more involved with, because 80% of those active shooters told somebody, wrote something down somewhere, and I know there's laws about whether you can go after somebody who puts something on a social media. Hopefully those are changing so we can intervene. But I want to strengthen those types of interactions you have with the students, not take them away.
Right.
And so what I would hope that you could do is, you sit down with either the superintendent or our legal staff, because he's not a lawyer, and put those things together, that if we could, keep the old contract, some of that language, and add the new language that we did with Marjorie Stone, especially where the principals get to meet and talk with. I mean, you can manage it overall, but let the principals have a say with who's there. And the other thing, with our SRD2s, some of the principals I talked to said, it says they're going to be there from the first bell to the last bell. It's that 15 minutes or half hour before that we run into some problems, maybe, and they're not necessarily with students, but it's parents who are both want to come to pick up the child, and we got to get in the middle of that, and we need you.
Let me
We
first
need
address your
help.
first thing is that actually you're exactly right, and I watched everything, so that's why it's good for us to sit and talk.
Yes.
And I know you guys are all subject to sunshine and everything, so it makes it hard to really know what the frame of mind is,
Right.
and that's what creates problems. And so there is no intent at all to change the interaction of the deputies on these campuses with the school, with the principals. The reason that we showed you the video, they're committed. They belong to the principal in a way. They work with the principals every day. They have a great relationship with them. There's really no intent. The intent was to make sure we comply with the act. We reduce the exposure of the sheriff's office, which reduces your exposure as a district, but we have no intentions on changing any of this contract, making my people robots to where they don't have interaction with the children or working with your principal and staff the way they have for 38 years.
I'm so glad to
Zero.
hear that.
But if you
So
feel
glad
better
to hear that.
modifying the contract a little bit, listen, you can't take the human out. You can't put a human element in a contract. And you can't have the sheriff going to a campus and telling a principal, this is what my person does. No, they're going to have that intimate conversation, intimate interaction on the campuses, like Paul showed in the video, and we have no intention on changing that relationship. But we want to make sure we're compliant with the act.
May I add, Sheriff?
Yep.
Yeah, first and foremost, I didn't want to suggest there's anything wrong with Riverview High School. Riverview High School is an extremely safe, excellent school that we're all very proud of. It just happens to be our busiest, and as a result of that, it deserves that personnel. When I talked about calls for service, again, that's how busy we are, but I think it's also important that I reaffirm for the board that last year, just out of the schools that we served, we conducted 600 hours of instructional training to over 13,000 students. So it's not just that instructional training. That's why it's so important, and we're so proud of our program. In 2015, this district, we were nominated by Darryl Reicha, was recognized by the National Association of School Resource Officers as the model program right here in Sarasota.
And your personnel went with them. Darryl went with them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was not only just us, it was the entire program.
And that's exactly why we didn't want to change that aspect of the contract, because we really like working with our school resource officers. We don't want to see them go.
And you're exactly right, Shirley. I'm going to tell you something. Me coming here with my team today and talking to you guys, so you're out of something, worried about all these things. The frame of mind of ours is all the same. It gets skewed, and we end up in these scuffles because we don't know what each other's thinking. And you're exactly right. We have never had any intention at all to remove that intimate relationship of the deputies on those campuses with those principals, for those to work and do what the principals need them to do and to interact with the kids. You heard Paul talk about all the training. But we also want to make sure we keep the campus safe and we comply with the act.
Mrs. Goodwin.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to the Sheriff's Office for your continued partnership and support. I have never run into an officer at a school that wasn't the most well-trained, the most responsive, the friendliest partner that I would ever find. So I want to say thank you for that. I think we've had some issues here that have arisen from trust, and I think we can get through these. But I want us to speak with one voice. I want us to have you as a continued partner. And I think a unified command is something that we're all interested in making sure that we have, not only for this year with our middle school and high schools, but also in the following years when we have our own police force.
Yep.
So I think those are important things for me. First and foremost, Tom and I negotiated. I was the chair of the board in 2013-14, and we were the ones that said, hey, we got to have 2 officers at Riverview, and Tom and I worked on that with Lori White, and we got that through. I firmly agree with that. I have a grandson at Riverview High School, so you won't get any arguments out of me with that. The issue of the lieutenants, I see the backup, and I'm going to defer that to someone else, but I do believe that that we have the ability to put a contract together with all of the compliance of Stoneman Douglas, and I think that we can move this along forward. But some of the questions that I have, I guess, may end up being in year 2, and I don't know if we're going to discuss that now or later.
I think that's a great time, because I think we need to discuss the elementary schools, and how you guys want to proceed with the contract. If you want Kurt to reach out to your legal staff to make what little tweaks of the contract you want to make, with the assurances that we're not going to lose that intimate relationship.
No,
you got to trust us on that.
I would add that we need to, and I know Dr. Bowden, you want to make a comment too.
Yeah.
I would add that since we're here and we don't need to continue to reconvene, and that you'll certainly year 2 will play a role in the unified command, what you mentioned. I think we should seize the opportunity to better understand how that looks in year 2 and the elementary component as well. Dr. Bowden, I know you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk specifically to the Riverview High School situation. Right. When we developed our contract proposal, the overriding philosophy there was we were looking for equity. And so everyone wanted to benchmark to the Sarasota contract, which was an 80-20 split and a single officer at the high schools within the city. I can tell you we've had the opportunity to meet with all the municipalities, that when I presented an 80-20 split in Venice, and I presented an 80-20 split down in Northport with the staffing level of a single officer at each high school, it was a very short conversation. They said, we need a second officer at Northport High School, and that is the recommendation that is in front of you. We too recommended that we go from 2 to 1. Law enforcement said to us, it's got to be 2. Same conversation took place in Venice. We said, if we're going to benchmark to the Sarasota, our opening offer is 80-20 with a single officer at the high school. Once again, Venice said we need the 2 officers there. Came up with a little different arrangement in Venice. So if you're saying you need a second officer at Riverview, that's how those conversations went down. I can tell you it was a 2-minute conversation. We said, how about 1 officer? They said, no way. And we said, how do we get to 2 officers? And so if we start with a threshold that we need the 2 officers at Riverview High School, as a board, you have 2 options, I think, available to you. One is to add another officer to the contract under an 80-20 split. The other is to keep the allocation of 10 officers and look to have us staff the only elementary school that they're in. And so I've had a conversation with the principal at Emma E. Booker. If you wanted to keep 10 officers, you could assign 2 to Riverview High School and then have our internal police department serve Emma E. So those would be the 2 options as a board that you would have in regards to Riverview High School.
Thank you. Any comments, questions on that? Mrs. Zucker?
I think that's a very good option. Since we are beginning with our own elementary, I really think it's a good option to do that. I would also like to question, we don't have the luxury of having 11 employees with 3 supervisors. So it's hard for me to understand why you need 3 supervisors for 11 people. Just seems out of whack.
Well, there's some redundancies there, because if we arrest somebody or a deputy calls in sick or gets injured, this is for yours, and that we have our own redundancies built in to our own workforce, so we make sure we can cover our zones, the residential areas are covered. So there is a redundancy there with the lieutenant, and that's the scale that we run in any operation. But I'll let Paul talk a little bit more about how you operate your division and how this has been in the contracts for how many years now?
Since its inception. I'm not sure how far that contract. It's gotten a lot of scrutiny lately. So if you look at that contract, it looks a little dated with the font, and obviously it was done on a typewriter. So it's quite dated in that regard.
This conversation's overdue. Go ahead.
Clearly, law enforcement supervision is different than I think most any others professions, absent other emergency services. What I wanted to remind is we have to be effective and efficient. The staffing we provided to you in this contract, as in the previous contracts, is the minimum amount of staffing. There is no redundancy in there. We don't have substitute deputies to call in and work that particular day. The sheriff is responsible for that. We're even more responsible for that now in regards to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act. If a deputy had to arrest a juvenile and remove him from that campus didn't have coverage. Now it has to have coverage the entire time it's in session. If that deputy had to Baker Act a juvenile, that deputy could leave the campus and conduct that function. That's no longer the case. This contract doesn't build any of that in there. We don't have roving or extra. You know, our personnel get sick just like your personnel do. Our personnel break their ankles just like your personnel do. Our personnel have children. They take vacations, any number of things. There are no substitute deputies like you would call in a substitute teacher. That level of supervision is necessary to ensure that coverage. And more importantly, those are very important decision making that the deputies are required to do. So they need a supervisor at their beck and call when they're on those campuses.
Can I follow up with that, please?
Absolutely.
I understand one of your supervisors is a youth supervisor as well.
Pardon me?
One of your supervisors is a youth supervisor as well. Supervises the youth. Another job with you.
All of our current supervisors is called the Youth Services and Crime Prevention Section. So we have 3 other crime prevention deputies reporting to one of those sergeants. So that's an effort to be as efficient and effective as we can for the district as well as the rest of the community. But yes, one of the sergeants has 3 additional deputies.
That's what I can't understand. That's
we can change that in the contract if it's a point of contention.
well,
That's
it's
not a big
because
deal.
we're paying
Yeah,
for
we can
that
change that.
deputy who is working.
No, not the deputy. You know,
The sergeant, whoever it is.
Yeah,
the one
the
person.
sergeant, in the prior contract was a 50-50 contract, so you were paying 50% of that sergeant's salary, when in fact 97% of their time was school resource related, but they also had 3 other deputies.
But now we're paying 80%.
Yeah.
And that deputy is involved with
modify that.
other issues.
Yeah, that's not a
other
problem.
parts of the community. So I find
It's a
that
principal issue. It's a principal issue that you have, and I'm fine with that. We can modify that in the contract and get that squeezed out.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Ms. Zucker, I would
Not a game changer.
I would just add to that particular sergeant has a crime prevention background, and that's probably more important than it ever has been in terms of site security, being able to analyze the campuses. That's consistent with what he does on the crime prevention side as well, the threat assessment team. Those components didn't exist. So to Major Richards' point, it's going to be probably 99%. Dealing with those kind of things, and 1% the crime prevention at homeowners meetings and things outside.
But to be quite honest, and I know it's not a game changer. I need them here. If it's a point of contention over 20,000, whatever, not a problem. We'll work that in the contract, and I'll absorb that. It's not that big of a deal. We need to have them here. We need that lieutenant for continuity. So if it's just a principal issue, not a problem. We can fix it.
I was glad to hear that we have flexibility with the SRO offices now. I didn't read that, and I didn't hear that prior to this conversation.
Yeah.
Because you can't read things you have to
That's
hear.
why we need to talk more.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll fix that with the contract. It's not that big of a deal. We can. Lisa's here, my CFO. It's not that big of a deal. It's not a game changer for me to absorb $15,000, $20,000. And I know the Board of County Commissioners, they don't have a problem with that either. They're good with it. So no, it's good. We'll take care of it.
Perfect.
Make it right.
Mr. Robinson.
Hi, Colonel Hoffman briefly touched on it, but some of the other services that you guys offer, and so you talked about the Joint Terrorist Task Force, and so what other services, because we concentrate in this contract about, officers with guns, what other services can we expect, and what services would be changing because of this, because we're doing half and you're doing half, or how will all that work out?
Well, certainly the history has been, and this is more in Major Richard's bailiwick, but we're a full
Yes, but I'd rather hear it from you.
I'm sure you would. we have a full service agency. Obviously, if there's a need for a helicopter, we have a helicopter. There's a need for canine in the schools, which happens quite frequently. We have canine. If you have a crime scene or a situation that you need addressed, we have a full forensics unit. I can tell you that in the 70-plus instances that we chased down post-Parkland, that required a lot of digital forensic work from folks in our forensic section and our detectives. We have a whole stable of detectives to be able to utilize on any crime that occurs on campus or off campus. So there's a whole host of other services that we have the ability to provide.
But will you be providing those at the elementary school or only at middle and high school now? And next year, when you guys aren't going to be here, will you be providing those services, or will we have to do another contract to contract out with you?
Well, I guess that's a question that remains to be seen, is what our involvement will be as you stand up your police department and we back out.
Wait, and before we go down that path, if you don't mind, I don't want to cut you off from.
I just have one more question,
Okay.
but it's unrelated to that question.
But I want to do from a checking off going down to middle and high school and the Riverview component and the number of staffing.
If you're okay. We'll pop it, and this will be a little bit modified because of Caroline's concerns, and we'll get that fixed, and we'll send it to your attorney to look at and stuff. If you want to say, here's what it looks like, and then we'll get that modified to whatever number is appropriate. We'll err on the side of with us. So.
Oh, can we get the PowerPoint back up? I think
And so, because then we do need to talk about the elements, so we can, like we talked about last time, Todd, is that we're here to help you be successful. I think the public wants you to be successful.
You're right on cue. That worked. Thank you.
So we'll have to, how you phase that in, phase out, what you want on the elementary schools. And we don't have an agreement on that. We need to work that out. We'll get that done today.
Okay, so middle and high school.
This will change a little bit, Caroline, because of your concerns of the one sergeant. We'll
So can we start at that first line and talk about, I think we've decided there's going to be 2 deputies at Riverview High School. And so the question is, 10 deputies and the internal department serve MAE, or 11 officers and the sheriff's office continues to serve MAE. So that if we're going to work our way down that chart, that would be the first question ahead of us.
Mrs. Zucker.
I would propose 10 deputies.
Okay. Can you start writing this down so we can change it? So we need to change it to 10, and then.
Wait, you have to
Well, that's just one of our.
Sorry. Well, so we'll change it to 10, and we'll modify the sergeant.
I don't know that I have a majority on 10.
Sorry.
So hold on, really quickly. I think what I would propose is because the next discussion would be how to integrate with the elementary. So this being a middle and high school discussion, that we would propose as step 1, SRD 10, Sergeant 2, Lieutenant 1. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's 2 board members, yes.
Well, no, I'm for the
As
sake
we
of
get to 3, I'm ready to say
for the
yes.
sake of conversation.
If it's 10, how many's at Riverview?
2.
It would be.
You have one deputy. You have one deputy, Emma Booker.
ME.
As you stand up your force, your board is saying that you can take that. That takes a one. We'll move that personnel over to. No, this has a review factored in.
Oh, this has Riverview.
Yeah.
And again, for purpose of discussion, just because I know that we'll address elementary in a moment, but so I don't know that we need to. If that's where the board believes that would be the right direction, Shirley, I see you. Then that would be step 1, and then we'll discuss the next phase. So, Mrs. Brown.
If we're going to take away the resource officer at Emma Booker right now and say we don't have enough of our new officers to fill in, I mean, can we hire and put that deputy that's there into Emma now? I mean, the one that's there now, can we hire that one to stay on at Emma?
Shouldn't we wait on that?
Or wait, I mean, or what would be the difference to put it through this contract and split?
What do you mean by rehire?
When
internal, okay.
We contract. If we don't have enough of our own resource officers, if we could take their resource deputy that's already there and contract that one in, and to me, those little details about when this one or that one, I think there's a bigger picture to be looking at before we make that decision.
Absolutely.
I personally don't, if we've gone to 11 at Riverview,
2.
We've gone to 2 at Riverview. Maybe we need 11. No, if we've gone to 2 at Riverview, my grandson's going to be there too, so maybe 11's a good number. But if we go to 2 at Riverview, I would rather, instead of making this decision right now without all the facts in front of us, maybe look at whether or not it makes sense to leave that one at Emma in the contract, or, because I don't know what our staffing level is at, and I'm sure that that deputy has already made relationships at Emma.
Agreed.
And so I would say, rather than making that decision now without all the facts, that we talk to the principal at Emma, that we look at what our numbers are, and, you know, when school starts, you know, whether we're going to have our deputy or one of their officers coming and going, or if we can keep this deputy that's already there for continuity.
So the contracts that we were able to negotiate with the cities essentially is a two-tiered contract in which we said, these are the schools that we want you to serve in an annual contract. And so that's represented here on this worksheet, just so you know. It lists the schools that they're going to be in. So it's two columns. One says the SRO, SRD contract, and the other talks about the contingency. And so the starting point would be to say, is Emma going to be on the annual contract, or do we need to talk about Emma when we talk about the contingency? And so if you look at, as an example, the agreement with the Sarasota PD, they are going to be in those three schools all year long. We've reached financial terms. That's our standard contract. There are 4 elementary schools in the city. What they've said is, we're prepared to start the year when your officers are ready, be it the first day of school or at some point during the school year. You're free to relieve us of that duty. What they've said is, we want you to reimburse us the full cost of the officer while they're in your schools, and they have a quarter of a sergeant, and during the time that they're in the elementary schools, they want to have that full sergeant reimbursed. And so, as a starting point, if you're going to say 10 deputies on an annual contract with the sheriffs, then you're going to move Emma out of the column for SRO, SRD, and move it over into contingency, and then we'll have a conversation about now not 12 schools, but 13 schools, and where we are in the staffing and what support we might need.
Mrs. Zucker.
I feel better doing that because that is what we're going to be doing ultimately. So why go one way now and then go and switch it? You have to switch. We're going to switch. So I would rather do it now than wait.
Okay. In the order of the agenda, I had a presentation for you, and the report that I have for you is that we have made 15 offers. Those offers have been accepted. We have 4 offers that are contingent. We expect that by the end of the day today, we are going to have 19 officers, 3 sergeants, and a chief of police. So our confidence level is very high that we're going to be able to reach that staffing level to get into the 21 elementary schools. I would not have made the offer to go into ME if I didn't have that level of confidence. It would just mean that instead of looking for 24 officers to serve in 21 schools, we look for 25 officers to serve a 13th school. So my personal recommendation is that we go to 10 officers and have them just in middle and high schools for 18-19.
That'll make it cleaner.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I agree.
Let me shut up. I know you keep forgetting you got to work.
Are there any questions or comments?
The thing is, Tom, we need 3. So.
Well, when we take formal action, but
you know, I don't like that we need 3. I'd rather we had 5.
But we can't do 1.
Let me offer you this before the superintendent has his chance to talk to you before you vote. And I know the city police are here. We can assure this community nothing's going to happen. If something happens, and I'm confident you're going to have them on the campus, I can assure you, if that person is on the campus, we're going to have somebody there. We'll work it out with your superintendent. If you're comfortable with the 10, do the 10, so we can talk about the elementary schools, and you can talk about what your design is on the elementary schools. If you're comfortable with the 10, do the 10. If something gets hung up before kickoff August, trust me, we're not going to not have a deputy there until you get things sorted out. You're going to hit a couple stumbling blocks as you build out your police department, and we're here, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Todd. We're not here to make you unsuccessful. We're here to help you try to be as successful as you can. And I can assure you, if it's just about should we have 10 or 11, what do we do? Do the 10. If you hit a stumbling block, we're going to have somebody there.
Mrs. Brown.
In the order of the sergeant and lieutenant, I mean, I think you said that they're there 24 or available 24/7, and I think there was some disagreement on whether that was accurate or not. But you know, at the one time, I'm thinking why do we really need this? But as we were talking earlier, DCF, I mean, we are required under DCF to have our people, not only our officers, but your officers, everyone's officers that are in the school, we have to have representation at where the law enforcement and the mental health, behavioral health, emotional health, whatever we want to call it, works together. So, yes, we can question why we need so many, because we've got, was it 400 or 500 APs to every 400 to 500 students. I mean, it's like, but we need one lieutenant for every 3 or 4 officers. But I would like to see if we hire, and if we keep these numbers in there, that we get a commitment that these officers, especially the management ones, will help us in that transition, will help us with what we need to do with DCF, and maybe even have a, I'm going to throw something out here that's never been, maybe even we keep these people on after we have our own, so that we have that connection between what we're doing and what you're doing, because, there are times we're going to need you. And I think, we need to work together. And I know it's especially those issues that we're going to have to be doing with the mental health. You're probably going to be working with more than just our officers, because, we have to put that into our schools. So you might even be looking into our, executive directors for curriculum too.
Look at it. And that's in the future, certainly. And so they do a lot more than just walk around and protect. They're very well schooled in crisis intervention, all the things you have for kids. And whatever you're going to do in the future, we're here to help you be successful. If you want that hybrid a couple years down the road, you build out your force. Yeah, we work with the police departments every day, and the police work with us. We're here to make each other successful in this county. And so, the chiefs are sitting over here, and they would tell you, we talk every day.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what it is. We need to be able to talk back
We can
and
talk
forth.
about whatever you want to do in the future.
Yeah,
and
negotiating by newspaper isn't a good idea.
It's not good. No, that's why I'm here. That's a good thing. So,
Mrs. Goodwin.
Thank you. I can remember a few years ago when we had Larry Lee on, Sheriff Knight, and you enjoyed communicating with and working with Larry Leon, and of course now he's in Palm Beach. But I think we will have a chief, and I think you will enjoy working with him, and I think that makes it even better for our transition. But I really believe that we need to look at staffing with the lieutenants and the sergeants at the 3 that you had said, and I haven't had any discussion with the superintendent or anyone about this before, but I think that since we are in transition, in a major transition, I think we need to staff so that we have the flexibilities that we might need in either helping us with our transition, but also finding out where we want to go in the future. And in the future, in another year, we may want to still have some advice or counsel from a policing entity. It may not be, it may be the city of Sarasota and others, but I think we need to open up that dialogue in this year of transition so that we in the future are working together, because there are issues that have to be worked out. Look at Parkland and look at the issue with the radios and the radio frequencies and the communications that failed, along with some officers that failed in going into that school. And I think that we need to make sure that we cover our bases and that we give our people, our safety and security director and our police chief and others, all the support they're going to need to be successful.
I agree with you, and I would tell you this real quick. Don't get caught short right now. So you're right. And secondly, when you're removing one from Emma, and we're going to modify that sergeant, that's going to help you, because I know you're the money, you're trying to bracket in the money, and so that'll put you closer to what you're trying to accomplish.
If I may, Sheriff, I want to just talk a little bit about jurisdictional authority and make sure you all understand that. We're a full-service agency. All of our municipalities are full-service agencies. Something occurs within those city limits on those city schools, that they're fully prepared to handle all of that. But we're the only agency that has jurisdictional authority throughout all of Sarasota County.
Correct.
So when we talk about 24-hour day, 365-day coverage, is at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning when there's a Snapchat video of someone holding a gun, we're fully prepared to send detectives out. I know Mr. Robinson asked about that. Our school resource deputy is going to be involved in that. The patrol deputy is going to be involved in that. We have a full contingent of detectives that are going to respond to that. We're the only agency that has a digital forensics lab. You talk about how difficult those social media accounts are. We're the experts in that. We have our partnerships with our federal partners. So whether it happened here in Orlando or it's posted out in Oklahoma, every instance is somewhere between about 60 or 70 that the Colonel mentioned. Before school opened the next morning, we resolved all of those instances. In none of those instances were any schools' functions interrupted because of our ability to provide that service.
And I think what Paul's, when you're building it out, build out systematically, make sure that he has what he needs. So when you get that 3 a.m. Snapchat and school's kicking off at 7:30, you better have the workforce in place to make that quick assessment and move. I can tell you during that after Parkland, I would go to the office.
You had a lot of those.
We were getting hammered. And I would go and our digital forensics folks were in the bottom floor there and they were tired. Mm-hmm. Our people attached to the Joint Terrorism Task Force were working overtime. We paid a bunch of overtime at that time because everybody thought the nation, and especially in Florida, were getting bombarded with these things. But certainly take them all seriously because when you don't is when bad things happen. And so, yeah, we were real time. Our people were hustling. And so those are the ancillary services. Make sure you're building in that you can, that 3 a.m. Snapchat, you want school open at 7:30, you better get moving and reduce that risk assessment.
It's even actually a little greater than that, and I don't want to get off your target here, but real quickly, if you understand jurisdictional authority, I'm not sure what your police department's jurisdictional authority is going to be. Does it end at the sidewalk? Does it work here at the landings? What happens on a Sunday when there's an alarm at that school, when there's trespassing at that school at 3 o'clock in the morning? You know, those are concerns we're still trying to reconcile.
And I know you want to speak, and but I'd like to add something. As we kind of talk through the initial contract on the 80-20 and the staffing, especially as we talk about transition, I personally, and again, to kind of come to resolution as soon as possible, I personally want to see, Marissa, I know you had that up on I would like to maintain the elementary SRO at ME. And that way we don't have to rely on the contingency there. We have it in the contract there. I know that SRO has already been there and created a relationship, and that was a unique fit. So my personal, as we kind of talk through finalizing, my personal would be to go with what is up on the board. Mrs. Zucker.
And my personal would be to change the one and not have an SRO from you at M.E. Booker. But I'd also like to thank you. I'd also like to thank you for agreeing to talk to the superintendent, because it's very difficult to talk to all of us like this. But he is our designee. He can't do anything without our approval.
Right.
So whatever he agrees to with you has to come before us. So it's really very helpful. And I heard you say, I'll talk to the superintendent and work it out with him. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, negotiation's gone bad. But I will say, and I hope you believe, there's no intent here to hurt anybody, is that when I took over in 2009, there was often confrontation with a bunch of the Board of County Commissioners and the sheriff. And I workshop with the board. Now, when I start to hear things going awry behind the scenes, I just ask the county administrator if I can come in and talk to them. It just refreshes everything. Everybody wants to see us talking in this community, and it works well. I was down in Northport. Chris is here. I was down in Northport last week talking to their board. So there's nothing wrong with you guys saying, hey, get the old man in here. We want to sit and talk and flush some things out, because we're all here to make each other successful. And, yeah, we're going to work with help you, like we committed a couple weeks ago with Todd, is that, you know, when you stand up your force, we'll do anything we can do to help you be successful.
If I may add one thing, if it helps in your decision making, in regards to that particular position, you realize that's an established position.
Right.
You only pay salary and benefits. I don't know if Marissa has it here broken down for that individual, but I think that's the least expensive option for you to maintain that consistency while you make and build it out for the next year. So for peace of mind, I think at best, you know, I'm willing to tell you it would probably be a push financially for the district.
Thank you. Mrs. Brown, then Mr. Robinson, and then Mrs. Goodwood.
I think because we don't have all that information here on that officer, I will, let the superintendent and the sheriff work that one out, with all those things in mind. I also am agreeable to the 3 supervisory positions. I understand we're going to be working with that. I would also like to ask that in the future, in the rather near future, that we have a workshop where we talk about how we are going to be working with, we don't even know quite sure what that looks like yet. You're going to have the meetings with DCF this afternoon. I'm going to attend. So we see how that works together for that other mental health component that we're going to have. We've got some ideas, and I would even like to ask somebody from that Sandy Hook Promise to come in. I mean, they've lived it, they've done it, and they're offering free resources. I mean, a lot of people have come and said, we'll help you, but we'll charge you. This one is free. And, they've done it, and they're going across the country. So I'd like to see that. And the other thing I'd like to see is that, as the current resource officers that we have, or deputies that we have in the schools, as they retire, I know there might be an issue over FRS or something like that, retirement systems, that there would be some sort of a relationship that if they want to retire and they want to stay on as a resource officer, that we can work together through that. We don't want to steal your officers, but if they're going to be retiring anyway, or they'd like to change their workload, we'd like to be able to have an open relationship with you to bring them over, because we're thrilled with the ones we have now.
They can do what they want to do when they retire. That's up to them. So.
I know.
One thing, and I know you want to resolve what you want to vote on for this bracket, because we have the chiefs here. We want to make sure your elementary school's ready to go. That's probably the most important thing, is that these numbers reflect salary and benefits only. I do not charge you for bulletproof vests, guns, weapons, training, and so there's a little bit of training in there which is specific for school resource deputies. But this, the 80/20 is really more helping you guys. It's not a problem.
Thank you.
Can I capitalize on Shirley's comment? Sure. Just, I don't think it's a decision that you and I can make in regards to the transition of an officer from the sheriff's department. That would require a statutory change, but maybe we could have a conversation offline about the Superintendent's Association and the Sheriff's Association making a joint proposal to the legislature. I think that would have incredible power about how those individuals, I mean, there's a shortage across the state for law enforcement officers. The fact that we have people willing to work and FRS makes them sit on the sidelines for a period of time, I think that the legislature would support something, particularly if superintendents and sheriffs spoke in one voice.
Yeah, I think so. Anyhow.
Mr. Robinson, patiently waiting.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of things have happened since the one time I got to talk.
You have the floor.
Thank you. I'll try and be really brief. I agree. I think that we need to make sure that we have the 3 supervisors, and please don't cut it back to sergeant, because like the major was saying, if somebody calls in sick, that sergeant's going to go to that school. Now there's only 1 sergeant left, and God forbid 2 people call in sick. Then what happens? I mean, we need to be able to have contingency, because I'd rather have somebody who's trained to be an SRO than, you get a deputy, or, you have to lower level service somewhere else in the county. So I prefer, one, that you don't lower service, because we're all live in the same community, and that the person you put in there is trained as an SRO and knows how to do the job. So that's very important to me. But you briefly touched on something, and I don't know if it was a nuance of words. When you were talking about jurisdictional control, and you said, "I hope you're ready at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning when you get a Snapchat." So I'm going to make sure I heard what you said correctly.
Yes, well, I mean, in regards to that jurisdictional authority, if
that would imply that we would have to have some sort of people there looking at the Snapchat and
we don't have any authority in Manatee County, so we have to work with our partners up there. But
I just want to make sure he said that. I just want to make sure I understood what he said. At 3 a.m.,
our folks go out and they'll knock on the door, and I'm not going to get into the cases, but yeah, we had a couple where we knocked on the door, and the parents are super nice, and.
But Major Richard said that we would be doing that.
And how are you guys going to handle that? Just be careful when you're building it out, that you have the authority to go do those things.
Yes. So
am I here? Did I hear you correctly?
Well, that was one concern, and we haven't gotten to that just yet. But in regards to the police department, I'm unclear, as a 30-year professional here, what your jurisdictional authority is. Does it end there at the sidewalk? If you have a child that attends that school that is causing an issue, can you go to their house and knock on their door? Do you have any jurisdiction?
And Ms. Goodwin mentioned, I have such little time before somebody interrupts me.
No,
So-
I'm going to let you keep it.
Because last time I got to answer one question, then I got interrupted, and I had two questions.
Right.
So Ms. Goodwin mentioned about radios.
Same thing, yes.
And so how is that going to work about dispatching and radio frequencies? I mean, we're going to buy $3,000 radios, but I don't believe it ends there. I mean, is that our responsibility also? Is independent jurisdictions, are they responsible for their own dispatching? And Chief Topino, did she just shake her head? Yeah. I'm trying to understand what it is that we're responsible for.
Stay.
Okay. She may have just been itching something.
Yeah,
I was watching.
I'm not sure. I'm not completely versed in Robert's Rules of Orders, and I appreciate your question. I'm not sure that that's this part of the meeting right now. We're talking about that.
I'm just trying to understand what services you're providing, because you're giving us a contract, and I'm.
Oh yes. Okay.
So I'm trying to understand what services you're providing.
We provide 100% of all of our services to those campuses in unincorporated Sarasota County that we currently staff or previously that have been unstaffed. Our elementary schools aren't staffed, but there's any incident that occurs during school session or after hours or on holidays or weekends, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office responds and resolves all of that themselves.
Thank you.
As do the municipalities.
So at a school, elementary school, if there's someone dials 911, is it your dispatch or our dispatch?
We do all
There's only one 911,
Okay.
so yeah,
for the whole county, we handle.
Again, the concern would be, what does a 911 operator do with that call? Who do they send it to?
Is that where from the elementary?
Everybody's talking about how many deputies we're having and how many supervisors, and we're not talking about all the other services.
Mutual aid and all of that.
All the other services they're providing. I'm trying to understand, because we're going to be talking later about our budget, and so I want to know is what services are we expected to pick up besides the deputies, and that's what I'm trying to flesh out.
I think that's a great conversation we got in the elementary schools, because that is, you got to have communications on your folks on those campuses so they can talk to us or Sarasota or Northport. And Chris and I talked about that a little bit. So maybe when you guys finalize what you want to do with the high school and middle schools here, and we move into the elementary schools, because I know the chiefs want to know about the elementary schools, so we can solidify that with your staff so we know where we're going to be, because I got to get my staffing plans ready to go.
Because, I mean, bottom line, Sheriff Knight, besides the deputies, are there additional costs that we need to be concerned about?
I mean, I don't know what you guys are going to do. I know what we do, so.
So, if I may, and I don't want to cut off if you have another question. So, to achieve resolution on this component, I want to confirm that the board wants to continue with the 80-20 offering, and thank you very much for coming to the table with that offer, Sheriff Knight, with the SRD at 11, sergeant at 2, and lieutenant at 1, keeping that one deputy at ME. Is that, and obviously we'll have a final vote of the board, but to move forward to the next step and next discussion, because we have to watch our time. Correct. No, we can. So.
Okay.
Jane had been patiently waiting.
Are we voting now?
Yes.
Oh, I have questions. We can't, no one made a motion, and I have some questions.
Right now.
Jane, did you?
Oh, I move for approval of the motion that would allow us to continue our contract with the Sheriff's Department for 11 school resource officers in middle and high school, and supervisory staff of 3, correct?
If I may, for clarity, what's before us is it's 10 SROs for middle and high, 1 for elementary, 2 sergeants, and 1 lieutenant.
Is that what she meant?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, I know it's for clarification.
So we get a total of 11, and 3 supervisory staff as presented.
Under discussion?
I have a motion and a second.
Has it been seconded?
Yeah, I second a third time.
I have a motion and a second. Any comments, Mrs. Zucker?
Yes. Are you saying that we should keep the sheriff's SRO at ME?
Mrs. Brown?
Yes.
Mrs. Brown?
I'm going to support this with the understanding that if we need to amend the contract going forward regarding the MAE, that can happen with an agreement between the sheriff and the superintendent, or, whatever. I mean, we don't have all the facts, and of course, if something changes or through agreement, we can make an amendment.
Correct.
So I will support this as presented.
Dr. Bowden?
So I just want to remind you that we did have an offer from the sheriff on one of the sergeants to go beyond 80/20. And so I don't want to leave that on the table. If you're going to say 3 supervisors at 80/20 for at least one of those positions, he has offered to account for the time that that individual spends outside of the school resource officer program. And certainly I think we should take him up on that offer.
But my only fear about that is,
Robinson.
my fear about that is if we do that, I'm worried about the sheriff, being in the position to, if he starts parsing the services that he provides us extra outside of this, it could cost us more money if we start going down that road with somebody. That's my fear.
My personal comment is I'd like to keep it as is, because there are elements of clarity that I don't feel I'm comfortable with, and I think Colonel Hoffman, you mentioned that there's a breadth of what that position offers, and so I'm pleased that we've made it to the 80/20 point. I don't want to mess with it more, and I'd like to finalize that. I know Mrs. Brown had a comment, and then Mrs. Goodwin. Oh, Mrs. Goodwin, go ahead. I'm sorry, you haven't spoken yet.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. I would just say, I'm thinking they're going to be plenty busy working in our district and helping us with transition. So I'm not worried about doing things on the outside. I mean, I think we all have a lot of work to do. So that's mine.
Thank you. Mrs. Brown, did you have any comments?
I just want to reiterate it. If we go forward and we find come January, we might want to make an amendment to this contract, I'm up for that. I mean, I think we've come to, an agreement that, the people that should be talking to each other about this are going to be talking to each other about this. And if they come to an agreement on something and they want to make an amendment, I'm open to it. But let's go forward with this right now, and, with the option that if something changes, you can come back with an amendment.
Mrs. Zucker?
I would agree, except I'm not so hung up on it. But I don't think amendments are going to be that easy. I think we're going forward with this contract, and we should anticipate that this will continue for the year, and we will not have amendments. Because once you get people in place, you don't want to stop moving them around. They're there for the year.
Well,
Mrs. Brown.
I'm sorry. What if something happened to that officer that has been at Emma Booker, and that officer moves out of the area, or something else happens that he's not available anymore, and we have to replace him? I would think that would cause an amendment. But if they're bringing an amendment forward, I would think it is an agreement between the sheriff and the superintendent, and why wouldn't we want to support that?
Wait, okay.
We don't know what's going to happen.
May I, excuse me, 1 second. I know that I want to move forward with the motion in the second that's on the floor, and I also want to be cognizant of time. So I believe that in any contract, there are also always circumstances that can be changed and amended that we have to evaluate at that given time. We could spend hours speculating on what that would be.
I have one more comment. We are contracting with the sheriff for a position, not a person. So if a person leaves, that position is still under the sheriff's control, because we have not contracted for a person.
That is correct.
Okay?
Can we close on the motion? Mrs. Goodwin?
I think we're ready to go.
So I'm going to do a roll call. Mrs. Goodwin?
Yes.
Mrs. Zucker?
Yes.
Mrs. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Robinson? Yes. And the chair votes aye. The motion passes unanimously.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Step 1. We made it.
And Bridget, thank you. And I want to apologize to the chiefs and city managers. I know we really want to talk about the elementary schools, and certainly we want to be here to help you be successful with that. So we kind of have a blend a little bit. So we kind of need to know where we're at. One thing I would like before we enter this conversation, and I don't want to speak for the chiefs, is for me at least, is that I would ask you to remember that when the Board of County Commissioners funds my budget, if I hire people, and then we just come off like an amendment, is that I can't just terminate them. And so I'd ask you to be sensitive to that as we talk about the elementary schools, because these are real people, this is real money, bulletproof vests aren't cheap, and these are ancillary costs that I will purchase for those people as we hire them. And so to just say that Tom's going to move 14 off the campuses systematically is something we need to have that discussion. I know Sarasota, Bernadette, and the city manager, and Chris and Peter are here so that we can talk about that, and that we can hopefully, amongst the law enforcement agencies, help you with that system about how you stand up your police force and how we systematically pull local law enforcement off those campuses as you're ready to go. But I know for me, we have a blend to try to save some money for the district, that we have some opportunities. But that's where we're at. But I kind of want to know, what's that look like? Because we'll have a separate agreement, that we'll work with your attorney on for what our model looks like. So, and I know we have a cheaper option that's available. I don't know if I have 14 of those that will be ready to go. We have a certain amount hired right now, but when in May, when it was said they weren't going to be needed, I did recommit some of those to charter schools. So I want the board to remember as we build this out, I have 21 schools, not just the district. So I have charter schools. We are working with the charter schools right now on a plan for them. But we have to flush that out. We won't know exactly where they're at or what their needs are going to be from the sheriff's office. And so I did recommit some resources to them that I can't go back on. My word is to them. And so, but we'll see where we're at, and we'll kind of blend this together on the elementary school campuses. From the sheriff's office perspective, I can't speak for the chiefs, but maybe we can all work together about how you want to stand up your force and how you systematically want to start where you want to go. And I know the city manager, Sarasota, and the chief are here, and I don't think that I'm not speaking out. Burnett, come up here and shut me up if I'm that you would like to be the first one to start, if we do start standing up a force, to start pulling them back off Sarasota first. And I think you and Chris talked about that. And
I agree with her.
Yeah. And so we're good with that. So how do you want to start that conversation about what our elementary schools look like? I know you probably have your agreements with the cities.
Dr. Bowden, I know you have a comment. And
can we put this up on the screen just so you can see it visually? And go ahead, Todd, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to bring to a close, we've passed a motion in regards to the financial terms of the contract. There's still some language issues outstanding, and so kind of as I recorded the conversation, we can work from the existing contract from 17-18, but it's missing a lot of the compliance with the Act language, or we can work off of the contract that you sent us, but we need to kind of move some language out of the existing contract regarding the selection of officers, the interaction with the district, be it the chief of police, the superintendent, and then to include a lot of that language about role of the officer. And so either one of those, I think, gets you to the same place. Yep. But as we ultimately have to negotiate contract and bring it to the board.
Which would be brought back to the board.
Language, especially with Kurt and his legal staff working with your legal staff.
Gotcha.
With Art Hardy and making sure that everything's covered legally.
Which would be my...
And we'll modify that sergeant salary like Caroline wanted. And so...
But from a legal standpoint, without doing it on the fly, without our general counsel reviewing it, but I think that I know Colonel Hoffman brought up a lot of elements to make sure we're in compliance and to ensure that you're the liability protection.
And my recommendation for the sheriff's office at least would be to have a separate for the elementary school so we can talk about that systematic movement.
And that's what we've done with the cities. And we have an annual contract that will talk about the middle and highs. And now Emma, and then the other contract is kind of what happens in the contingency. So I think ultimately those two come together. So Art will be back on Monday. He should contact Colonel Hoffman.
Yes.
Will he be your designee?
Yeah, and if it's okay, just if you look up on the screen here, we were striving to hire 14. Like I said, in May when I learned that they may not be needed, I did continue hiring for the charters. and with the anticipation of
That's what I
potentially
wanted to comment
they may be needed by this district, so I wasn't going to get caught without
Sheriff,
having.
could I
give
just
the-
interject one point because it's unrelated? I want to make sure that our charter schools know that we do care about them, that we are concerned about them. We have some charter schools
Yes,
actually
yeah.
here today. You know, I know that many of them are going through the Guardian
They're
program
Guardian right now, yes.
and I hope that's going well for them, but they are not forgotten.
Correct.
And,
Yeah.
you know, they may be phase 2 or phase 3 for us because that has to be that way, but we do consider them our students.
Yeah.
We are concerned with their safety and security always. And so any questions they might have, they can certainly direct to us or to the superintendent, but we are concerned with what they're doing with their schools.
And we'll all work together on that, you know. So, but I think, I don't know how many we have hired right now, but certainly they're going to be going into crisis intervention training, some other things that we've got to do to comply with the act and make sure they're up and running, ready to go. So I don't know exactly how many I'm going to have for the district. I do know that we're reconciled with the charters when they're done with Guardian, see if they all made it, and where they're at. But we do know there's at least 3 that are going to need our services. And like I said, in May, I did commit to them, so I don't want to go back on my word. But if you look up here on the screen, and Todd and I had talked back in March, I think you wanted to commit at 66,000 a unit at that time, 64, I can't remember what the number was, 65. And so we were able to work off a specialized program, and I won't bore you with all that. So it comes in, and I'll absorb the training costs and startup costs and everything. But one thing I would ask you to be sensitive as we finalize this is that absorbing the startup costs of stuff, bulletproof vests and everything, they're not cheap. And they can only be worn by the person who's fitted for them. So I do have a responsibility to protect those individuals who we're hiring, and I do have the responsibility to give them the equipment that they need, including a bulletproof vest, a 9mm, which are not cheap. So startup costs for cops are very expensive. So I would ask you to be sensitive to that, and that I would ask maybe give Todd and his staff some flexibility that we do a 1-year contract and just keep us, but it doesn't preclude the opportunity that if we do want to do something different. Listen, the agreement is the agreement, but I don't know with how many schools Sarasota and Northport have that you will get into the county schools next year. Anyhow, you may, I don't know, but it certainly doesn't preclude us from amending it up discussion, because I believe we're going to be removing some patrol deputies to staff up some of these schools, because I didn't want to hire full-time deputies for these schools, knowing that if they're pulling back off the campuses, I have a responsibility to the Board of County Commissioners to be responsible with the money. And so we don't have any extra deputies in the budget this year for our whole county. And so if I was to remove a deputy off a campus, where would that person go? I can't just absorb them into a budget that the Board of County Commissioners has set for me. So I would actually consider it. I don't know exactly where you're hiring, what you're going to do, but maybe when the 12 schools we have here, that we can finalize this. I'll have the final numbers, I believe, for the Guardians, working with the charters, how many we're going to have SRD2s, which will be a cost savings for you, what we'll have available of that, and then the rest of them will have to be full deputies with the salaries at the 80-20 like at the high school, middle schools, just because I committed to the charter schools. So just something to think about. So something, and if you want to talk to the chiefs about how that all works, what they got to do, I know you already got that worked out with them.
Yes.
But I would ask you to consider that. So we're back to 12 elementary schools, 14 green uniforms for the redundancies again. No supervision. We'll handle that with what we're using the other ones. And we'll do as many SRD2s as we can, depending on our finalization of our hires, with the rest to be augmented by green uniforms, green and white cars, and I will pull them from different segments of my operations, and then we'll systematically pull them back into our patrol operations as the district stands up its police force, with the agreement that you want to do Sarasota first, Northport, and then we'll come in last, if that's your idea.
Mr. Robinson.
Does this have, I'm just going to try, does this have 80-20 also? You can't start whether for trying. I'm just trying.
Well, no, because I'm pulling patrol deputies that are funded by the board for the community.
But this does include vehicles and
this the 14 the SRD2s at 63,301, and we're absorbing the startup costs. Is that's salary and benefits. They don't have cars. They're specially trained. They won't be, I know you talk about it, they're there to meet the requirements of the Act to make sure the schools are safe. They will not be school resource deputies. Of course, they're going to have an intimate relationship with the principal, and we're going to train them how crisis intervention training comply with the Act, but they will be different than the deputies you saw up on the screen. But that, as you integrate your force, you can do what you want to do with that action. And so, go ahead, Shirley. I know you're.
Will they be?
Superintendent.
Oh, hold on one second.
Will they be 40 hours a week? I mean, so that we don't have to have it just from bell to bell, that they can be there a little bit before and a little bit after? Because I know some of our principals were concerned about that.
I can assure you, in my conversation with the superintendent back in March, is that they will be there before the kids get on the campus. They're going to trust me. And if we have to pay a little extra, we can absorb that.
Thank you.
We're not going to leave the schools unprotected. Go ahead, Todd. I'm sorry.
So I want to make sure I understand, on the SRD2s, you're looking for an annual commitment. If you hire these people, you don't need them to be replaced in September or December. You're saying that, yeah, on the SRD2s. I will tell you, I've received a number of phone calls from charter schools asking if we could provide school safety officers from our internal department. If you have SRD2s, I really would like to direct those, because I think they'd be willing to make a longer-term commitment than a year. We're confident that we're going to be able to get into our 21 elementary schools, and so the agreement that we've entered into with the cities was kind of a variable component of we can go month to month until you're ready. I don't know that we would have a desire to make an annual commitment, because we want to get into those schools sometime this year. So I know you have SRD2s, the ones that you have queued up ready to go. I would defer first to our charter school partners, because I know a number of them would like sworn law enforcement officers, and that $63,000 price I think would be appealing to them. Yeah.
One thing I will say about that is if that's the case, I probably won't hire them, because I'm not going to spend the county's money on bulletproof vests and everything. So if we want, we'll have to do 14 full-time deputies at 80-20 split.
Well, what I need is a contingency. I believe we're going to be ready, and so our conversation back on the 12th is, well, what if you're not? And so what happens on the 13th? And so the agreements we entered into the city is, I can put an officer in the school, but I got to pull them off of patrol and hurry up about it.
Totally agree with you, but I'm different than the cities, where I'm hiring a specialized 10-month employee, paying the startup costs and everything, and I'm backfilling with my law enforcement operations patrol people, so I'm removing some service from the community to backfill, which is easy for me to take them back and put them back in their positions, to give them back to Paul and put them back in their positions. The SRD2s will be terminated, and I'm not going to finish hiring, training, using county money, bulletproof vests and everything, knowing that they're going to be used and then removed. That wouldn't be fair to those persons we're hiring, and it wouldn't be fair to the county to buy, or the taxpayer spend that kind of money and just throw it out.
I agree. And so I guess my position
what's our answer? So what do we do?
So do not hire SRD2s on our behalf.
You want to do 14 full-time deputies at 80-20?
So if I go back to the conversation that took place on the 12th, I think that was one of my personal biggest takeaways was the impact of the greater community of relying on our law enforcement